the New World Order of the Antichrist with a false prophet, which will be leading false Christianity. We talked about false Christianity some in our last lesson. The Bible says all the world will wonder after the beast. Revelation 13 and verse number 5 says, "And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies." This seven-headed, ten-horned beast is given a mouth. We know from other verses in the Bible that the mouth is from the Antichrist. But again, the Antichrist will rule for a very short time, but just before the second coming of Jesus Christ and the Battle of Armageddon. So the Antichrist, we talked about this before, the Antichrist will rule right here. He starts in the abomination of desolation and he goes 3.5 years, which is 42 months. And so he rules for a very short time. Notice what is said in verse number 5. "And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. So power was given to the beast to speak great things, and power was given unto him to continue for 42 months. The reign of the Antichrist is 42 months, which is 3.5 years. So the question is, where do people get a 7-year tribulation at? We have people teaching 7-year tribulation. If there was, just think about this for a moment. If there was a 7-year tribulation, if there was, the Antichrist would only be able to participate in half of it. Because it says that his power is to continue only goes for 42 months. But then tribulation period is the time Satan's wrath. You remember we're talking about the time of Satan's wrath. So the 7-year tribulation period, only half would be tribulation because Satan only in the picture for 42 months. So from this point here, which is the beginning of the 7 years, to this point, that's the total 7-year period right here. But there's a middle of the week, because remember, this is signifying Daniel's 70th week. So, in the middle of the week is the abomination of desolation. Paul made the statement that in 2 Thessalonians chapter number 2, verse number 3, and verse number 4, Paul says the Antichrist will be revealed when he stands on the Temple Mount claiming to be God. So where does this take place at? Where does this happen? It happens in the middle, at the abomination of desolation. That's where it happens. So the Antichrist claims to be God at this point. Now we know that this takes place in the middle of the 70th week, which is 3.5 years before the 7th trumpet. This revealing of the Antichrist takes place during the abomination of desolation, which marks the beginning of the 42 months of the tribulation period. Now Jesus says the same thing. Jesus says it's at the beginning of the abomination of desolation where the reign of the Antichrist begins. The abomination of desolation starts again 42 months before the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming. So we know both Paul and Jesus agree that the Antichrist will be revealed at this point right here. So it will be in the middle of the 70-month or the 7-year period that Daniel speaks about, which is not tribulation period, all of it, because the first 3.5 years will be a time of peace, a temporary peace. Remember, the Bible says when they say peace and safety, then comes some sudden destruction, like has never come upon the world before. And so here you've got great turbulence, great tribulation that comes after that first 3.5 year period. So again, remember Jesus said the same thing that Paul said. So we can confirm a 3.5 year reign of the Antichrist and 3.5 years of tribulation from different angles of the Bible. We can show that in different places. Again, remember what the angel told Daniel. Don't forget that the words of the prophecy were closed up until the time of the end. These truths were stored up for our generation to understand. In other words, it was meant for our generation, or the generation at the end time. The reign of the Antichrist will be short, but it will be a terrible time of suffering. Jesus said in Matthew 24:21, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be." This is going to be a terrible time, this 3.5 years. That while the beast has 7 heads, the mouth of the beast is the mouth of the lion. This New World Order beast will speak with the mouth of the lion. What does it mean when the Bible says that the beast shall speak with the mouth of the lion? Keep in mind that this world government will use the mouth of the lion to speak. And remember what the lion signifies. It signifies Great Britain. What was the language of Great Britain? It was the English language. And so the English language is the language of this world government beast. Throughout history, the language barrier has always been a problem for establishing world government. You remember we had the Medo-Persian Empire, we had the Babylonian Empire, we had the Grecian Empire. And so they depended on trying to establish one language, one way of communication to be successful in world government. Now, if you remember the Tower of Babel, during this time, when the family of Noah got off the ark, God told his descendants to spread out across the earth. In other words, said replenish the earth. He wanted them to go out. Nimrod wanted to disobey and build a world government and a tower that would reach up into heaven. He wanted to find his own means of salvation, which is the same problem we have with false Christianity. And so we see a lot of these things in this story of the Tower of Babel. God stopped this by what? Confusing the language. Remember, it was the language barrier. And so God stopped this by confusing the language so they wasn't able to communicate with each other. This blocked their ability for world dominion. The only real world government will be, and always remember this, when God comes back and sets up His kingdoms and puts down all world governments. In other words, at the seventh trumpet, when the seventh trumpet occurs, this is where Jesus Christ ends. What we said this in other lessons. He ends human government at this point. And so this is where God comes back and sets up His kingdom and puts down all other governments. The Bible says it's not in man to direct his own steps. So it doesn't matter who tries to go into power in a world government system, a new world order. It will always fail. It will always fail. Because the only person that's able to succeed is God. Remember the old saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When anyone other than the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ, fills that position, it will fail. Only Jesus Christ can fill that position of power. So the mouth of the lion is the mouth of the New World Order. But why? It's been decided that the English language is the global language today of the New World Order. Pilots on international flights are required to speak in English. You know that telephone operators that handle international calls are required to speak in English. Kofi Annan, who is the former UN Secretary General, said these words: the world community has made the decision that English is the global language. It's also the language of the internet. 2,000 years ago, the Bible predicted this would happen, and it's in place right now. 2,000 years ago, the Bible predicted John on the island of Patmos seen this 2,000 years ago, that when world government came into being, its voice would be the lion, which is the English language. So 2,000 years ago, God showed John that the language of the world government would come from the Lion of Great Britain. Let's talk about the United Nations again for a moment. We know that the United Nations is world government. This is the only structure for world government, so there's no way to miss this one. Because it's the only organization in place right now. Where did the UN come from, and where is the UN located? Way back during World War I, which was called the Great War, we talked about it earlier, there was 8.2 million that died in that war. This was the highest death toll to that particular date in history. The world cried out against this war, and people were concerned. This gave the Nimrods of the world an excuse, the would-be dictators and the communist dictators and those who are career politicians that thought they would gain something from it. This gave all of them an excuse. People cried out that we needed global structural security. And Americans wanted this also, but without losing their constitutional rights. This is what happened. So they formed what is called, this was after World War I, they formed what is called the League of Nations to ensure global security. This was championed by a president by the name of Woodrow Wilson. You remember Woodrow Wilson was the same one in history that made the statement, that it was recorded in history, that he made the statement that I have unwittingly ruined my countrymen. It was said that on his deathbed, he made the statement, I have unwittingly. In other words, he's saying I was deceived into ruining, selling out my countrymen. So Woodrow Wilson championed this so-called League of Nations, but many in Congress objected and foresaw the danger. They did not want to surrender U.S. sovereignty and understood the risk to our security. You know, we can sure look back now and see the foolishness in that move. But they voted this move by Wilson down at the time. They rejected it. The League of Nations got voted down and all of it fell apart. 20 years later came along World War II and they had 52 million people died. Now we go from 8.2 to 52 million dead. Now the cry for world security is even louder than ever. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had already put the words New World Order on the back of the U.S. dollar bill. Here's a man who dreamed of world government. Remember, we talked about him earlier. He dreamed of world government on the stage. This man is on the stage after the death of 52 million people. After World War II, Europe came together after Hitler unleashed the terrible conflict in Europe. So think about this. Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, and Roosevelt came together and decided to divide up Europe after World War II happened. They were dividing up the spoils of war, as it were, you might say. So you have Stalin, head of the bear, Churchill, head of the lion, and Roosevelt, head of the eagle. Remember the beast of Daniel 7. And they decided what to do with the leopard beast, Germany. They had to decide what they were going to do with Germany because they were the aggressor in this war. Remember, Germany, or the leopard, the four heads, which had the four heads. So the three heads are deciding on what to do with the fourth head, or the four heads of Germany. Roosevelt was a dying man during this time with health issues. He had a young man which was putting together a plan for world government. The idea was to have a United Nations similar to the United States, and all that was just a smoke and mirrors. So they wanted to have a United Nations of the world. So they called on this rising diplomatic man. And he was appointed to write the charter for the United Nations. This man served as the Secretary General of the United Nations Formation Conference in 1945. But there was a big problem. You know, you can go on the internet and you can do a search about this. I've went on there and done quite a bit of reading on this subject. But there was a big problem with this man who was the champion, the one who was pushing this system of world governance. 3 years later, he was convicted of lying about the spying activities because he was spying for the Soviet Union and was sent to prison here in the United States. This is the man who at the side of the President of the United States handled most of the negotiations supposedly for the interests of the United States, which that's not what he did. He turns out to be a communist spy. This man was actually helping the Soviet Union. Remember, that's the bear, Russia. This man was actually helping the bear Russia receive most of the European countries that were carved up after World War II, and America stepped back and let it happen. So this man's name is Alger Hiss, probably the correct way to pronounce it. Alger Hiss. He went to prison for lying about his spying activities. See, they couldn't convict him because the statute of limitations had ran out. So they convicted him of lying to Congress about his activities. So when Hiss designed the United Nations, he designed it to be a global union of socialist republics. The hammer and sickle, which is surrounded by the wheat. You remember, I don't know if you've ever seen a symbol, that symbol that they use for Soviet Union, where it has the wheat that goes around, and then they have the hammer and sickle, and they also have the hammer and sickle on a red flag. Red representing communism. And so the symbol that's used for the United Nations has a very similar symbol. And so they use the olive branches, and they have it formed, and it looks almost identical to the wheat, with pictures of nations in the center. And so they have a very similar symbol used for the United Nations. So Hiss designed the United Nations to be a communist world order or world government. This communist world government even now hands down its edicts through the World Health Organization and down to the CDC. Think about this. And our doctors obey their orders concerning our family's health. This is just one fact we deal with concerning world government. Another is the fact that they want to decrease the population because of the environment. They look at us being detrimental to bugs and trees. And so they want to, according to their own website and their own information that they put out, they want to depopulate. They want to reduce the population. Add this fact with the sixth trumpet judgment, where the Bible talks about a third of mankind dying, being killed, which the Bible predicts. Think about this for a moment. We talked about this so many times, but I like to keep rehearsing this. The sixth trumpet judgment, the Bible says 1/3 of the population will die. That's a lot of people that's going to die at the sixth trumpet. We are right there on that mark now. And so world government, we're actually starting to see, especially with this administration that's in there now, we're starting to see the workings of world government. In fact, right now, United Nations are actually in other countries, in France, and I've heard even in Canada, they're actually starting to detain people. The United Nations troops are detaining people because they deem them an issue over a health issue over this virus situation. So we're already starting to see the workings of this United Nations organization trying to function in these other nations, and they're as close as Canada to us now. That's pretty alarming. And so remember what we talked about. World government, according to the Bible, the Antichrist in his world government is depicted as the beast. the beast of Revelation 13. And again, we said the Bible teaches in Revelation chapter 12 and chapter 13, if you read Revelation 12 and then cross over to the first part of Revelation 13, the Bible lets us know that Satan gives power, that the dragon gives power to this world power, this world government. And we talked earlier that this government will be a communist organization. It's communist at its roots, we know. Even though the United States was the one who started the United Nations, we know that the United Nations began, and in fact, the headquarters is in New York City. So we are headquartered here. Even though all of that is true, the Bible explicitly teaches us that world government, that end-time world government will be empowered by the dragon, which is Satan. And so we know that that's exactly where the roots are. And remember the red horse rider. The Bible says that that red horse rider brings death. Well, the red horse rider signifies communism. The red horse rider in the book of Revelations goes forward with a sword and kills. And so this is a communist movement that the Bible predicts. In fact, communism, this country, you hear a lot of talk right now, and have heard for many years, socialism. They want to socialize everything. Because socialism is the child, as it were, of communism. And so everything is to be socialized. Everything is to be done per se for the good of the whole, which is a communist Marxist theology. Individualism is considered a relic of the past. When we talk about the word individualism, we're talking about every individual having rights. But under socialism, it's this idea that that the individual has to give up their rights for the good of the whole. And so that's taught in Fabianism, communism, Marxism, socialism. It's taught in these theories of thought. And so we're going to end our lesson here. We're going to pick up in our next lesson next week. And we're going to discuss in our next lesson, we're going to talk about the deadly wound. We started talking about it here, but this is going to be a kind of an in-depth thing, but we're going to talk about the deadly wound. We're going to talk about that Fourth Reich of Germany. Germany has, we know we had the First Reich, the Second Reich, and the Third Reich. And then we have the Fourth Reich that's on the scene, that's in the workings now. If you remember the Third Reich, Hitler was in charge of the Third Reich. Well, now we're going to discuss the Fourth Reich. And we're going to discuss the deadly wound. The head of the beast that the Bible says was wounded, the Bible says. And they thought that the beast was dead, but then the beast became alive again. And so this head is one of the four heads of Germany that we're going to discuss. How that head was wounded at World War II, and everybody thought that it was over with. And so we're going, and so there came about the dividing of Germany, if you remember, and they had the Berlin Wall, And then the Berlin Wall came down and the two Germanys came back together again. And so this deadly, I'm just giving you a little piece of it, but we're going to go into it more in depth. But then this deadly wound, or this head that died under the Third Reich, comes back alive under the Fourth Reich. And so the deadly wound of that head of that beast comes back into play during the 10-nation kingdom of the Antichrist. And so we're going to talk about that as well. So it's been so good having you with us in these lessons. I've enjoyed these lessons very much. I look forward to being with you in the next lesson. So until we are come back together, may God keep you and bring you back so that we can continue in our next lesson.